Now, any rock group would give their eye teeth and maybe even die for that monumental album that has great songs, great lyrics, lifting messages, great riffs that just defines the time and elevates the audience. That's exactly what Brian Wilson was trying to do with the album Smile. You ready? Let's drop the needle. The recording sessions for the album Smile kept going on and on because Brian was in the habit of not recording a whole song, but recording little pieces that could then be spliced together in whatever sequence that he wanted to later. So the sessions went on and on and on, and Brian kept sinking further and further into paranoia. In fact, there's one song on the album, it's called Mrs. O'Leary's Cow, and Brian was convinced that after they were recording that album, when the building next door burnt down, his song was responsible for it. In the middle of all this madness, Carl Wilson is drafted into the military, but he refuses to go, claiming he's a conscientious objector, and it took years for this to go through the courts. Finally, after hours and months of recording Smile, it's finally shelved and scrapped and becomes one of the most talked about albums that was never released. Now, had it been released, it would have been released right before Sgt. Pepper's. And it would have been really interesting to see who captured most attention in that summer. Would it have been the Beach Boys or would it have been the Beatles? I have listened to Brian's version, which we'll talk about in a minute, of the finished album of Smile. It's amazing. And had it come out first, the boys from Liverpool may have really had a challenge on their hands. Brian was exhausted and his mental health continued to deteriorate. And he knew he couldn't do anything on the level of Smile. But Capitol demanded another record. So Brian and the boys went back into the studio and decided, well, let's do a simpler sort of homespun approach. Maybe we can use some of what was in Smile. And they released an album called Smiley Smile, which I remember when it came out, it was sort of like, wait, what happened to Smile? And what is this? Because it doesn't sound nearly as grandiose as we had been told that Smile was going to be. It leads off with Heroes and Villains. And unfortunately, it's a great song, but without the context of where it was in Smile, it kind of got ignored. In fact, the album didn't sell. And the rock press really ravaged it, saying that all those comments about Brian Wilson being a genius was overblown hype. But I do like Heroes and Villains. It's a great song. Vegetables. She's Going Bald. With Me Tonight. Wind Chimes. And Wonderful. After this album, Brian once again withdrew. And so now you've got Carl and Mike Love trying to take over the group. And in 1967, they release an album which is kind of soul-infused, and it's called Wild Honey. It sells poorly, but I do like Wild Honey and Darlin'. Then Mike Love joins Donovan and the Beatles to travel to India to study transcendental meditation with the Maharishi Yogi. This experience influences Mike Love's writing. So on his return, they record the album Friends. This is not one of the Beach Boys' best albums, but I do like Friends, Be Here in the Morning, and here it comes, Transcendental Meditation. In the summer of 1968, Dennis befriends a young, aspiring musician and thinks he's got some talent, so he brings him in the studio and introduces him to Brian. And this young musician plays his song to Brian, and Brian hates it and tells Dennis to get him out of the studio. And who was that young, aspiring musician? It was Charles Manson. And so not long after that, the Manson family descends on L.A. and kills Sharon Tate and the Bianca family. causing lots of terrorism and paranoia throughout not only LA, but the world, and certainly inside the Wilson family, who all feared for their lives. With all this going on, Brian decides to admit himself into a psychiatric hospital, and the band decides to record an album without him. It's called 2020, and it's their worst-selling album to this point. It starts with Do It Again, a musical flashback to their earlier styles. I also like I Can Hear Music, All I Want to Do, and then there are 2 outtakes from the Smile sessions, Our Prayer and Cabinescence. But without the Smile concept around them, these 2 songs come off weak. In 1969, their contract with Capitol finally expires. And at this point, the Beach Boys had sold 65 million records worldwide. That's just amazing. But then they sign up with Reprise Records. Now, Reprise has an interesting clause in the contract. It says Brian Wilson has to be proactively involved in the recording of their album. Their first album for Reprise comes out in 1970, and it's called Sunflower. And it didn't really sell very well, but I kind of like this record. But take a look at this cover. Boy, have they solved their image problem. The Beach Boys, these are the beach men. Long hair, beards, they're definitely now a product of their time. I enjoy This Whole World, Add Some Music to Your Day, Deirdre, Tears in the Morning, Forever, and Cool, Cool Water. Now, I know a lot of you will say that your favorite Beach Boy album is Pet Sounds, and hey, it's a great album. But this next album I'm going to talk about is actually my favorite Beach Boy album. And it came about because they got a new manager, Jack Riley. Now, at this time, Brian was getting really depressed that the Beach Boys were not considered hip. So Jack jumped on this. And the first thing he said is, you got to lose those striped shirts and white trousers for the touring band. You got to look more contemporary. Secondly, he said, we're going to make Carl the leader of the band, and he's going to create the musical direction. And then third, he said, there's this song that you recorded but never finished back in the Smile sessions called Surf's Up. You need to finish that. And so they did. And they had their next album titled Surf's Up, and it's my favorite Beach Boy album. I like every song on the album, but if I'm going to pick just a few, it'd be Don't Go Near the Water, Long Promised Road, Disney Girls 1957, Feel Flows, A Day in the Life of a Tree, Till I Die, and then, of course, the incredible Surf's Up. In 1972, Bruce Johnson leaves the band, and they hire Ricky Fataar and Blondie Chaplin. And these guys bring a whole new level of energy to the band. Their first album comes out. It's called Carl and the Passions, So Tough. Originally, for some reason, this album, Carl and the Passions, So Tough, was released as a double album, but it was really that album paired for some reason with Pet Sounds. In my opinion, there's one standout song on this album, Marcella. But I gotta tell you, at this time, I saw the Beach Boys at the Hollywood Palladium, and I stood right in front of the stage. And they really were a hard rockin' band, still with those great harmonies. It was a tremendous show. In the next episode, we're going to take some California boys and move them halfway around the world to Holland as they enter their next phase. Now, as usual, I've got a Spotify playlist which has got songs that were in this episode, so you can check those out. Here is the link. In the meantime, there is more to the Beach Boy story as we move forward, so watch our next episode. Thanks for watching, and keep it rockin'. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.